Something strange is happening to the US dollar. President Donald Trump's policies are having a major impact on the American currency. It's already dropped 10% this year, the biggest fall since 1973. At first, this just looked like a natural consequence of the, shall we say, unpredictable things Trump has done over the past 6 months. But as time's gone on, it's starting to look less like an accident and more like a deliberate part of the bigger plan. For decades, the dollar has stood as a symbol of trade, capitalism, and American dominance. But not everybody sees that as a good thing. While it secured the position at the center of the global order, it could quietly be undermining their economy in ways nobody's ever really noticed. Of course, intentionally trying to bring down the dollar would be an insanely risky strategy. One wrong step could likely trigger a financial crisis, not only threatening the US economy, but the entire global order. But despite this, it looks like exactly what the Trump team is trying to do, setting the stage for one of the biggest economic dramas in history. The only question now is whether the plans might actually work or if they are set to disastrously backfire. It's hard to understate how important the dollar has become. If you're American, nearly every aspect of your life, from the price of groceries to the interest rate on your mortgage, is somehow affected by the currency. That's mostly thanks to the fact that the dollar is by far the most dominant asset in the world. Today, more than half of international trade invoices are priced in it, and around 90% of foreign exchange transactions involve the dollar in some way. While it's easy to assume the US has always been the dominant force across the world, that's not really true, at least not in the way we think of it today. The dollar's current power is the result of decades of careful policy, the exact same system that Trump's team now seems so determined to challenge. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US was focused on securing its spot as the most powerful country on Earth. But on the other side of the Pacific, things were changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Countries like South Korea, Singapore, and China were growing at lightning speed. Cities that barely existed a decade earlier were now packed with skyscrapers, cranes, and glowing skylines. As these economies took off, millions of people suddenly had far more money to spend than ever before. A lot of it went toward the usual things: new tech, nicer cars, bigger homes. But the speed of that growth meant a lot more cash ended up getting saved. The problem was these countries didn't yet have deeper, reliable ways to invest that money at home. There weren't many stable banks, and stock markets were still small, and local companies weren't big enough to suck up all that capital. So instead of keeping their money sitting idle, investors started looking abroad, mainly to the United States. Over the course of a decade, hundreds of billions in Asian savings were poured into the country. This created something of a golden age for the American economy. In just a decade, the stock market more than quadrupled in value. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Apple were all born out of this era of wild speculation and easy money. But under the surface, it also had a more subtle, potentially even more significant effect. It sent the value of the dollar soaring. In just a decade, the currency climbed by nearly 50%. One of the biggest increases seen in history. Of course, at the time, most people thought this was great news. And to be fair, there was good reason to believe it would be. When the value of the dollar rises, while other currencies stay the same, each dollar can be exchanged for more foreign money, which means imported goods suddenly become cheaper. Before long, American homes were overflowing with foreign goods: Japanese electronics, Korean appliances, and Chinese toys. For consumers, this was great news. After all, they were effectively richer without having to actually do anything. But this did come with a major drawback. While it might have been great for the people buying the products, it was crippling for the old-school American businesses. Because the dollar was so expensive, it became really expensive for America to sell their products to other countries. Even for people in America, it made a lot more sense to buy cheaper imported goods rather than the pricier ones made at home. At the same time, cheaper labor markets were quickly opening up overseas. Places like China, Vietnam, and Mexico offered wages that were often less than a tenth of what American workers earned. In some cases, just a few dollars a day. This combination made it basically impossible for American firms to compete. So, across the country, businesses, particularly in the manufacturing sector, began to quietly shut down. Within a decade, the U.S. lost roughly 3 million manufacturing jobs and industrial employment as a share of the total workforce fell to its lowest level on record. But despite the struggling industries, all the foreign money pouring into the country kept the stock market booming. Of course, industries like finance and tech thrived under a strong dollar. So on the surface, Americans were richer than ever. Average incomes actually went up by nearly 40% in this time period. But the thing was, an enormous section of the country was basically left behind. Before we look more at this, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Incon. If you use the internet as much as I do, then your personal data is already out there scattered across personal search sites, online directories, and even commercial databases. Data brokers collect and sell it without your consent. And according to the annual breach report, this number is up 211% from 2023 to 2024. That means criminals, stalkers, or even employers can easily access sensitive details like your address, phone number, and family info. That's why Incon is so valuable. With just one sign up, they legally contact hundreds of data brokers on your behalf and get your data removed. If it reappears, they go after it again. You can even use their custom removal feature. Just send them any link where your info is exposed, and a privacy expert will take care of it. And unlike shady players in the space, Incon is the first and only data removal service independently verified by DOJ, so you know it actually works. It's 3 simple steps. Create an account, authorize them to act, and let Incon do the rest. Plus, it's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Go to incon.com/invisiblehand, and use the code INVISIBLEHAND to get 60% off an annual plan. Now, let's get back to the video. Nearly half of this income growth went to the top 1%, while the bottom half saw their share of national income fall from around 20% to just under 13%. States that had once relied on manufacturing jobs, places like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, were hollowed out. But this went almost entirely unnoticed while the economy boomed. That is until 2016, the year Trump got elected. If you've been following politics closely enough, you might have noticed something about those states. They're all hardline Trump supporters. And there's a good reason for that. In both 2016 and 2024, he ran on a clear promise. On every front, in every way, on every policy, we are guided by the same economic goal: to keep jobs in America. His idea was really to try and roll back decades of globalization, breaking away from the interconnected world economy and replacing it with a network of regional trading blocs. To be fair, that's exactly what he tried in 2016 when his administration slapped 25% tariffs on imported steel. The problem was they didn't really work. Estimates suggest that the trade war cost the U.S. around $170,000 manufacturing jobs. And at the same time, U.S. companies paid an estimated $46 billion in additional import costs. Not exactly a roaring success. Now, there's a lot of debate over why that happened. The majority of economists simply thought that the tariffs backfired, raising costs for American producers without ever making domestic manufacturing more competitive. But it was around that time that somebody named Scott Bessent came up with a controversial explanation that quickly gained traction in Trump's inner circle. His theory was actually pretty simple. When tariffs were first announced, global investors expected them to hurt the economies of countries that sold goods to the U.S. That uncertainty attracted a ton of foreign money into American assets. After all, at the time it was still considered by far the safest place to store money in the world. After the tariffs were first announced, foreign investment into the U.S. gradually increased by nearly $200 billion. Of course, by itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the thing is, with more money flowing into the country, the value of the dollar ended up getting pushed even higher. And with a more expensive dollar, it became even harder for American companies to sell their products abroad.